So let's talk about tariffs. There's a lot of things that people seem to not know, and I'm not talking about it from a political side of things. I'm talking about it from a small business that's experiencing it side of things. So, whatever you believe or don't believe, I just want to tell you how it's impacting us as a small business. So, we manufacture radios, AM, FM, weather, radios like this, small versions, large versions, wind up versions, all sorts. Most of our manufacturing is done in China right now. All of it is done overseas. So when April 9th rolled around, our tariffs went from 0 to as high as 185%. Actually, I think even some categories were more than that. Um, but it was life altering, to say the least. So in 2022, when I transitioned into ownership of the business, I've been here for 29 years this year, and we had 0% in most categories. Some categories were 25%, uh, parts were 35%, and so this new tariff was on top of. And so right now we have this 90-day period where it's 30%. That's again in addition to what was already there. So if you had a 35%, now it's 65%. If you had 25%, now it's 55%. If you had 0, now it's 30%. I know a lot of people talk and they're like, oh, well, if it's a dollar, that's 30 cents. But real life is our products anyway, when your specialty aren't a dollar, right? So if your cost of goods for this widget was $20, now you have an additional six tacked on. Um, if it's $100, now you have 30. And when you're operating on particular margins, and those are what you use to plan your whole business, that definitely is hugely impactful. It's the difference between hiring a person or not hiring a person. In our case, we had to go through all of our expenses and reevaluate, restructure some things, look at things differently. If you're a huge corporation where you have millions of dollars in capital and that's a non issue for you, as far as the cash flow side of things goes, great. I don't think for anyone your profit margin isn't an issue, right? You have to have some level in order to stay in business and pay your bills and do all the things. Let's say we imported about 1.3 million in products last year, and we paid about $15,000 in tariffs. That'll vary depending on, again, what category we're importing in. But from April 2nd, it was April 2nd, um, in a 9-day timeline, we went all the way up. So that same 1.3 million in product today at 34% was going to be 442,000. At 54%, 702,000. And in our case, for what we manufacture, the lead times are 6 and 8 months. So it's not like you're placing an order and then in 30 days that order is shipping. In addition to that, it's not like you can place an order for 100 units. You know, there's minimum order quantities. You'll hear a term being thrown around, MOQ. That's what that is, minimum order quantity. Typically, when you're manufacturing electronics or anything kind of scale, your minimum order quantity is 2, 3, or 5,000 pieces. So more than two typically is what you're um, expected to pay. In a lot of cases, too, you're putting a deposit on these, and that deposit is based on the price when you place the order, right? But the tariffs aren't passed on from the manufacturer overseas, it's from the US government. So it's when it arrives at customs. So if it was on the ocean during this time frame, depending on if it arrived within a window and whether you got it here, depending on what tariff was applied. Talking to another small business, they had TV mounts, and theirs aren't maybe quite as specialty, but they'd already placed the order. The order was already on the way. they ended up paying 185% tariff. Well, when you figure out that math, like again, if you're saying, okay, it's a $100 product that I'm paying $100 a unit for, if the tariff's now 185%, I can't do the math in my head, but that's over an additional, what, $185 that's going to be added on. So, and that doesn't count the percentage of your transaction for storage, for customs, because it's all a percentage of the fees. So you can imagine as a small business that it gets really difficult to plan. So in our case, we have other products that we're working on, verticals that we're working on going into, and it it put a pause on some things. So some of the distribution that we do for business to business had to be paused because it's like, how do we charge our wholesale customers or our business to business customers? Like, we don't know what to charge them. In addition to that, what we were charging was based on the inventory we have. What if we can't place another order? Do we want to sell it at a lower price or should we hold on to it? Like, there's a lot of variables to take into consideration when there's so many unknowns and it's so volatile, when it's changing every 30 days, or in some cases for a little while there, it was every day. It was like the dread of coming into work was pretty strong. In addition, that's a lot of work that you're putting into and energy that you're putting in to something that literally has no value from a business standpoint. Like, it's not growing my business, it's not making our service better, it's not making our products better. Um, if anything, it's the opposite of all of those because now you're looking at, oh, maybe I don't invest in that reporting software that would tell me some stuff that really would be useful to help me grow my business. Or maybe I don't hire that person that I really need. And when somebody goes on vacation, that particular task either doesn't get done while they're gone or only partially gets done. Um, or maybe I only hire a person part time or I use a virtual assistant. There's just so much that, um, in my opinion, is is not best for small business. So it would be amazing if there was like an exclusion at a certain point for small businesses, because typically, I mean, businesses like ours, you don't have piles of cash sitting around waiting to be used for taxes. The other part of this is it doesn't just come off your bottom, right? So it's not just an expense that gets expensed on your books the same way that like maybe your PG&E bill does. It's something that goes into your cost of goods, so it doesn't come off until you sell the inventory, which in and of itself is its own challenge, I guess. So when you're looking at it again, you know, in some cases, like that 442,000 means you're not profitable as a company this year. Um, and it probably means in order to be profitable, you're going to have to make some major adjustments. Some of our other friends that are also in manufacturing and similar categories, um, they've been working on looking at other places to manufacture. We also have been doing that. One of the things we've run into is ours, again, is specialty manufacturing. So it's not like everybody does it. So if you're doing something like making a t-shirt, for example, there's probably a lot of places. I'm not in that industry, so I can't speak for that truth, but probably a lot more places that make that, and it's probably easier to set up in a lot of ways than things that require PC boards and test equipment that's very expensive and large and requires skilled workers at a certain level in order to be able to run it. Also, programming requires engineers. There's a big difference between that and maybe something that's just a piece of plastic or a toy that's very simple. Um, as soon as you get into electronic components, too, there's certifications and there's lab tests, and people need to know these things. So, finding another source for that. In addition, like in our case, a lot of times you've worked with these manufacturers for decades. So we've worked with most of ours for over 2 decades, and we've developed with them proprietary, the molds, the cases that make these, those are called molds. And those are expensive, like really expensive. Anywhere like a small mold for something that's just like a little plastic piece might be $1,000. A big mold like that can be anywhere from 50 to $100,000, depending on how many buttons and holes and different things that need to happen and how the plastic has to go in. And there's just a lot to it. So it's like, okay, well, if you don't own that or you shared the cost with the manufacturer, because a lot of times that's done, how does that work? And sometimes, from what we're learning, is some manufacturers won't accept molds from other countries. They will only use the molds from their countries, which also makes things challenging. If you're trying to go from China to the US, let's say you do own the mold, metric versus not, right? So there's just a lot of factors in consideration. Like people go, oh, why don't you just manufacture in the US? Well, a lot of the parts come from China. It is actually something that we've been exploring for a while now, trying to figure out how to make it cost feasible, and also how to make sure it's the quality level and that they can do the volume, um, and that we can afford to do it. Again, we're a small business, so it's not like you have millions of dollars to devote to research and development. And in our case, we're paying cash as we go. So um, it's not like we have somebody else's money that's invested in here that we can use for that development. So again, the time frame matters, right? So if you're looking at it from a standpoint of how would we do that? Because I always love that question, like how could we? There's a lot of infrastructure that has to be in place. I've traveled to China now a couple of times, to Taiwan also, and our staff here has gone most years over the course of the time that I've been here, sometimes multiple times in a year. Um, those trips are eye-opening. Like once you see a factory and what goes into it and how they're set up and the ones that are really good, and then making sure that again the quality is there, that they understand what you're asking for, that the testing is done, that it's a good company to work with. All of those things play into um, what you're looking for. In addition to that, their government also has invested. So like here, when we started looking at it, it's like, okay, well, there might be a place in Texas that does this part, and there's a place maybe in Arizona that does this other thing, and maybe there's a place in Reno that does this thing. Um, but when you go into China, like, okay, here's the area that does this, and then 2 blocks down is the area that does this, and then 3 blocks down, and there typically are more than one. Um, Again, because we're in such a specialty area, some of that has consolidated, especially since COVID. And so there aren't as many options as there used to be, but there are still more, and they're again within a really short radius. Right now, looking at it from a parts, so for example, just the display, trying to find a display that's what we want, that has the quality, that will work with the parts, that we can program to do what we want. So far they're all from China. So if we import that, we have to figure out, okay, so that tariff is 65%. So if that, if you start getting into all the different parts, like what parts can we source from where and how much are each of those components and what are the tariffs on those countries? Because none of them are made here, almost none. I think so far, I think there's been like about 5 parts, and they're really small ones that are inexpensive. So it's not the majority of what we're looking at. So it's again navigation, figuring that out. If somebody had come in and said a year from now, this is going to be a 10% tariff, and then another year from now, it's going to be this, could have planned for that and adjusted pricing accordingly, adjusted manufacturing accordingly, given time and resources for, again, a small business when you have under 20 people, and most of them don't do those kind of roles. They're dealing with getting people their packages, taking calls, and things like that. It definitely becomes more challenging. So I wanted to share that and how it's impacting small businesses, and also to let you know how it's impacting other businesses potentially, so that you have a understanding of reality of, yes, this is how it works. This is really what it's affecting. Yes, we as the small business importer owner are the ones paying the tariff when it comes due, and it's due immediately. There's no grace period. They take it right out of your account. And that's how it works.